It's important when having your Rule Zero discussion that you and the other players talk power level, so that way everyone can pull out a deck that's near or around the same power level, so that the game is as even and as fair as possible, just so everyone has a fighting chance. However, there's this problem that I've ran into multiple times, where me and another player are talking power level, and they either overvalue their deck or they undervalue their deck in terms of power level. And this can lead to some pretty awkward game interactions, especially if someone brings a casual deck to a competitive environment or vice versa. For instance, last week I went to a game store, and as I'm flipping through their binders, browsing their stock, I hear this guy boasting about his commander decks, how they are top tier, cream of the crop, how he squashes anyone that he faces. So overhearing all this commotion, I walk over to this guy and I tell him, hey, me and my friends are pretty experienced players, I'd definitely like to play you sometime. He laughs in my face. Now for the sake of the story, he introduces himself to me as Dan. And he tells me, hey, listen kid, if you play against me, I'll probably make you cry and just quit the game altogether, because I'm the best there is in my group. So, first of all, I'm thinking to myself, I've never cried because of Magic the Gathering. Secondly, I'm thinking, best there is in your group. You probably play with the same fucking 5 people all the time. And it's like one of those classic cases, oh, you're the best in the village, not the best in the kingdom. Well, out of curiosity, I ask him like, oh, well, how big's your group? And he's like, that's them over there. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm gonna see like a bunch of guys over there playing Magic. Well, I turn and look, and I just see 2 guys over there that look like they have the social skills of a Discord mod. So I immediately start laughing out loud. Well, Dan gets pissed, and he tells me, we'll play you right now if you want. So I'm like, yeah, let's go play. So as me and Dan are walking over there, Dan does not stop with the self-anointment. He just keeps talking about how great he is of a player. And so we all sit down, and we talk power level. Well, Dan and his 2 buddies are saying, yeah, our decks are like 9s and 10s. So I'm like, okay, EDH. And they're like, yeah, competitive commander. So I'm like, all right, cool. I pull out one of my EDH decks, and it's Urtai. Now, I built Urtai to just pretty much counter, card draw, and tutor until I hit a combo. That's the whole deck, really. And I'm watching what Dan and his buddies are pulling out. And Dan pulls out Sethron, and I'm like, what? Minotaur Tribal? And his other 2 buddies pull out the Swarmlord and Ural the Miststalker. So of course I'm taken back by this because I thought we were playing a CEDH game. But Dan and his friends profusely explained to me that their decks are 9s and 10s. So I just went along with it. I end up playing 6 games with Dan and his friends. I even switched to more casual decks throughout the games. And guys, I don't care how you would have cut it. If you were playing against Dan and his buddies and your deck just had 99 lands in it, you still would have squashed Dan and his friends. They sucked. They suck so badly. Dan then gets all mad and he's like, that's it. I'm tired of this politics crap. Just you and me, one-on-one. And I say out loud, I'm like, what do you mean you're tired of this politics crap? You and your friends ganged up on me every single game. And Dan's like, no, that's not what happened. I humor Dan and I play 3 more games with him, and I end up using Gazcall, which is just a reskin of Zergo. The whole premise of this deck is I use wrath effects that don't really affect my board state. So for example, I have board wipes that don't specify planeswalkers, so I can have as many planeswalkers as I want and they're not going to be destroyed. Also, Gazcall is indestructible on my turn, so the board wipes don't affect him. Funny enough, that is exactly how the games ended up going. Dan had no rebuttal for anything that I was doing. The entire time we're playing those 3 games, Dan's friends do not stop hyping him up. They're like, yeah, Dan's really good. He's about to take the game here. Or they'll be like, oh man, Dan, use that right now on this, and then he's screwed. So then I come out and say, wow, Dan, I'm sure glad you got 2 cheerleaders to stroke your ego and make you feel better. And then all 3 guys look at me and just give me this death stare. And Dan gets up out of his chair and he's like, oh yeah, well, I didn't even bring my best decks. I left them at home. Which I'm thinking, first of all, that makes no fucking sense. Why would you bring your worst decks to play with? Secondly, I just play along with it. I'm like, yeah, I brought my worst decks I've ever made. These are really jank. And Dan and his buddies just give me this death glare. I see them just seething through their skin. In case you're wondering, me and Dan are on good terms now. But on the flip side of that story, I played against this guy named Tim who was at a different game store. When Tim and I sit down to talk power level, he tells me his deck is only a 5. So I'm like, okay, I'll also pull out a casual deck. Well, when I see Tim's commander, I immediately question him about it because he pulls out TNT, Tymna and Thrasios. For those of you that don't know, Tymna and Thrasios are one of the most competitive decks out there. Just from the sheer amount of cards this deck is able to draw, not to mention the colors that they're in make it very easy to combo off. So I question him about it, of course, and he tells me, oh, I don't have a lot of the cards necessary to make this competitive. This is really dialed back from being EDH level. I just go along with it, and we get to playing. I'm immediately suspicious because turn 1 he plays Esper Sentinel and Chrome Mox. Out of curiosity, when it hits my turn 2, I play Glimpse of the Unthinkable, just so I can see what Tim has in his deck. Within the 10 cards he mills, I see there's 3 different combo pieces in there, and so I immediately call him out on it. Tim's defense was that he's using a bunch of cards that are watered down versions of CEDH cards, such as lands, tutors, card draw, you name it. But I told him you're still able to combo on like turn 4, if not sooner. And that's the problem when it comes to discussing power level. The fact that we have a grading system based on opinion. For example, you could pull out a deck and tell me it's like a 6. One of the other players might think it's an 8. Another player might think it's a 4. And that's the problem. The fact that everyone has their own thoughts and feelings on how powerful a deck is, making it very hard to discern how powerful something truly is. I think if you wanted to be very forthcoming about how capable your deck is, I would just give a short little summary of what your deck does. For example, I have an Atraxa deck. It focuses on poison counters and proliferation with a Super Friends sub-theme. You see, that's a lot more enlightening than just saying, I have a deck, it's a 7, let's play. Cause like, everybody rates their deck a 7, that's not helpful at all. Let's try another one. I have a Go Wide Krenko deck with a lot of fast mana and Anthem effects to buff up all the goblin tokens that I'll be making. I also run some wheel effects just so I don't run out of steam. You see, that's a lot more helpful than just giving some arbitrary number that doesn't help discern how powerful your deck is. Now some of you may be thinking, oh, this gives away the element of surprise, and I couldn't disagree with that more. It's not like you're listing off all 99 other cards in your deck, you're just giving a generalization for how your deck is trying to win, just so everyone gets a good idea on how powerful your deck is. So that way the game is as fair as possible and everyone has a fighting chance. I really only talk about power level when I'm playing against strangers, because when I'm playing with my friends, we pretty much just break it down into 2 categories. Are we playing a casual game or are we playing a competitive one? Because you know, a casual game is going to be a lot more relaxed, where combat damage is more prevalent, and a competitive game is going to be a lot more sweaty, where everyone's trying to combo off as fast as possible. I do believe most players have a good understanding at how powerful their deck is, but there is a good chunk of players that also either overvalue their deck or undervalue their deck. But how did you guys discern between power level? Have you guys had any funny or awkward interactions like I had? I would love to hear your stories, thoughts, and opinions down below. And guys, thank you so much for watching. I can't wait to see you all in the next video.